Alright, so this video is to help you get a better idea in terms of how to write an intro paragraph. So you know that the formula exists, but it's not so formulaic is my point today with this video here. You can definitely put whatever you want in there. There's no like right answer, but these components need to make up and add up to an entire intro paragraph. So I'm going to be talking about the loose paragraph that you wrote for the take home. And so using this as a guideline, you can revise your intro paragraph and figure out what you need to do for the next one. Because ultimately, spoiler, you're going to be using this prompt and this reading for your first take home essay as a whole. So we're slowly constructing it and using it as practice for a full essay. Now remember, this is take home, but on the actual exam, these students only had 40 minutes to actually write this thing. So they had to come up with all this stuff. They had a soapstone, they had to analyze, they had to find devices, all that in the context of 40 minutes. So by the end of the year, you should be able to do that. But right now, it is difficult because you didn't get a chance to. So without further ado, let's start with the prompt because this is where a lot of you messed up on. You gotta figure out the actual fine lining of the questions asking you. So let me read it real quick for you verbatim. The passage below is the opening to a speech made in 1960 by American journalist and politician Clare Boothe Luce to journalists at the Women's National Press Club. Now, here's the thing about these intros, and I just snipped this from the actual prompt itself. These are always good to use for your intro paragraphs because it gives you all the occasion you need, all that context, so you can put it in that first part there if you wanted to, if you needed to. That's up to you. In this speech, Luce went on to criticize the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of the perceived public demand for sensationalist stories. They pretty much gave you the purpose, you know what I mean? Or like at least the occasion and context of it all, right? Like this here lets you know what she's trying to do with the particular speech. And a lot of times they give that away to you. So you don't have to figure it out in the speech. You don't have to like, dig so far. So the actual reading aspect of it is not so intensive. This is where you guys messed up on, though. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well developed essay, analyze how, Luce uses this introduction to prepare the audience for her message. So, remember, this is an introduction of her speech. This is not the full speech itself. So, how does she use this intro to prepare for the rest of the speech that's probably coming, where she's criticizing and so forth? So you got to figure out what's been put in the front of the speech before we actually get to the actual speech, which we don't actually have context for, but we should know why she's establishing this intro in a way it is. Support your analysis of her rhetoric with specific references to the text, and so that's for your body paragraphs and so forth, right? So that being said, a lot of you didn't mention the fact that or a lot of you didn't write with the mindset that this is an intro to a bigger speech. And so you wrote as if this is the full speech itself. No, it's just a piece of it. So let's figure out how to actually write in terms of these three components. We talked about premise, context, and thesis. And so let's talk a little bit about each one real quick. Premise is going to be just information that you came up with, things that came from this intro taught, for example. So whatever you can talk about journalism, the subject of it, of journalists, of news, of whatever, that's going to be part of your premise, just how you can explain and contextualize it. Speaking of context, then we get to the second part here. What of the speech, right? In terms of how is it written, how is it organized, what does it contain of? You got to write it in a way where it really sounds like you actually read it, because a lot of you wrote your context and it didn't sound like you read it. It sounded like you skimmed it, or you just had a general idea. You got to put specifics in here that actually refer to the general structure of the essay. And then finally, we have the thesis, which is the claim that you're following, right? So this is what your body paragraphs are going to be based off of, and also what we're analyzing throughout the entire piece. So let's read it verbatim and see how you do, or how I did at least. Sorry. So in my premise, I wrote, in a time when the news is always circulating nonstop, it is crucial for the audience to receive accurate news. People seldom have the time to reevaluate the information they are given and will consequently take what they are given at face value. Sadly, journalists have time and time again failed to reach this onus. Instead of researching and presenting what is informative, journalists have sacrificed their craft to present opinion, cheap excitement, and gossip. So I talk about journalism as a whole. I talk about that general idea of like how journalists have failed to do their job. That's what my premise is. I'm working with that throughout the entire intro paragraph and probably throughout the entire essay as a whole. Furthermore, in 1960, American journalist and politician Clare Boothe Luce recognized this trend and sought to criticize their bad habits. And I might want to specify this actually. There could be journalists. So we want to make that as specific as possible. However, she recognizes that she cannot simply attack the press even though they are her own tribe. Remember, she's a journalist, so technically she could criticize them, but she also knows she can't just walk on stage and say they suck. So she has to be strategic with this. Starting with some humor of reminding the press that they have invited her for their own verbal abuse, Luce then transitions into the heavier subject of journalistic truth, the pursuit of and the lack of. So in this last part here, it kind of summarizes the structure of her entire piece, right? She first tells them, hey, look, you invited me here, so why are you complaining? Or you shouldn't be able to complain. And then she goes on to talk about the fact that journalists have failed in their pursuit. In the finale here of the thesis, by speaking of what good journalism and bad journalism consist of, Luce juxtaposes the current state of journalists indirectly for them to self-reflect on their craft. So in this piece, I'm really going to look at how she defines good journalism, how she defines bad journalism, and also how does she juxtapose. So even though my essay is like largely on the idea of juxtaposition, it might not just be on that. So that's how you kind of construct an intro for the most part, and that's going to be how you want to structure it for the rest of your essays, for at least rhetorical analysis.